My name is Thomas Brennan, and I have worked at the Riverside Memorial Crematorium in Baltimore, Maryland for 22 years. I started in 1999 as a general maintenance assistant, sweeping floors and cleaning the viewing rooms. And over the following 2 decades, I learned every aspect of this profession. I became a licensed crematory operator in 2003, and I have personally overseen approximately 9,000 cremations since then. I am 54 years old, divorced, father of 2 grown children who visit on holidays, and I live alone in a small house about 15 minutes from the facility. I want to be clear about something from the start. I am not a spiritual person. I was raised Catholic but stopped attending Mass sometime in my 20s. I do not believe in an afterlife in the traditional sense. I do not think that souls float up to heaven or down to hell when the body dies. I have spent more than 2 decades reducing human bodies to bone fragments and a tight powder, and in all that time I have never seen anything that suggested to me that what we cremate is anything more than organic matter. Carbon and calcium and trace minerals. The same elements that make up everything else in the universe. I am telling you what happened to me not because I have changed my beliefs, but because I do not know what to believe anymore. I have spent months trying to understand what I witnessed, and I have failed. I have no explanation that satisfies me. I have only the facts, which I will present as accurately as I can remember them, and the questions that keep me awake at night. The Riverside Memorial Crematorium is a modest facility attached to the Riverside Funeral Home, a family-owned business that has served the Baltimore area since 1947. The crematorium itself was added in 1982, when cremation began to grow in popularity as an alternative to traditional burial. We operate 2 retorts, which is the technical term for cremation furnaces. They are manufactured by a company called Matthews International and can reach temperatures of up to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, a human body is reduced to skeletite remains in approximately 2 to 3 hours, depending on the size of the deceased. I describe these details because I want you to understand the environment in which I work. This is not a mystical place. It is an industrial facility with concrete floors and stainless steel equipment and strict protocols governed by state and federal regulations. Every cremation is documented. Every set of remains is tracked with identification tags that survive the cremation process. There is no room for error, no room for confusion, no room for the kind of thing I am about to describe. The cremation process itself is straightforward. The deceased arrives in a container, usually a cardboard cremation casket, or sometimes a wooden one if the family has chosen that option. We verify the identification, check the paperwork, and remove any items that cannot be cremated, such as pacemakers, which can explode at high temperatures. The container is then placed in the retort, the door is sealed, and the burners are ignited. The primary chamber reaches full temperature within about 30 minutes, and the cremation proceeds from there. After the cremation is complete, we allow the retort to cool for approximately 30 minutes before opening the door. What remains inside is a collection of bone fragments, white powder, and sometimes small pieces of metal from surgical implants or dental work. We use a magnetic rake to remove any metal, then transfer the bone fragments to a processing machine called a cremulator, which grinds them into the fine, uniform powder that families receive in the urn. I have performed this process thousands of times. I could do it in my sleep. And in all those years, the remains have always looked the same, grayish-white powder, sometimes with a slightly tan or brown tint depending on various factors. Random in distribution, formless, unremarkable. White powder, nothing more, until March of last year. The deceased was a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was 78 years old, a retired school teacher from Towson who had died of pancreatic cancer after a 6-month illness. Her family, a daughter and 2 grandchildren, had arranged a small memorial service at the funeral home before the cremation. I did not attend the service, as I rarely do, but I saw the family briefly when they came to say their final goodbyes before we took Eleanor to the crematorium. The daughter, whose name was Patricia, asked if she could have a moment alone with her mother before we proceeded. This is a common request, and we always accommodated. She spent about 10 minutes in the preparation room, and when she emerged, her eyes were red, but she seemed composed. She thanked me for taking care of her mother and asked if I would treat her gently. I told her I would. I always do. We performed the cremation that afternoon. Everything proceeded normally. The retort reached temperature. The cremation took approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes, and when I opened the door to inspect the remains, I saw what I always saw: bone fragments and white powder scattered across the floor of the chamber in the random pattern that 22 years of experience had taught me to expect. I used the rake to pull the remains toward the front of the retort, checking for any metal that needed to be removed. There was a small piece from a hip replacement, which I set aside. I was about to transfer the remains to the cooling tray when I noticed something unusual. The powder near the center of the chamber had formed a pattern. At first, I thought it was just an artifact of the way I had raked the remains. Sometimes the bone fragments settle in ways that create temporary shapes, like seeing faces in clouds or animals in rock formations. The human brain is wired to find patterns, even where none exist. I assumed this was the same phenomenon, but as I looked more closely, I realized that what I was seeing was not random. The powder had arranged itself into letters, 5 letters, formed in the grayish-white powder against the darker floor of the retort chamber. M-A-R-T-Y, Marty. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the letters. They were not perfectly formed, but they were unmistakable. The M was slightly lopsided. The A was missing its crossbar, but the word was clear. Marty. A name. My first thought was that someone was playing a joke on me. One of my colleagues, maybe, or someone from the funeral home. But that made no sense. The retort had been sealed for nearly 3 hours at 1800 degrees. Nothing survives that temperature. Nothing could have been placed inside the chamber without me knowing. My second thought was that I was hallucinating. I had been working long hours that week, covering for a colleague who was out sick. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. I blinked and looked again. The letters were still there. I took out my phone and photographed the chamber. I do not know why I did this. Maybe I wanted evidence in case I later convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe I just needed to document what I was seeing. The photograph showed exactly what my eyes showed. 5 letters in the powder. Marty. I stood there for several minutes, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, I did what I always do. I transferred the remains to the cooling tray, processed them in the cremulator, and placed the resulting powder in a temporary container to await the urn the family had selected. The letters disappeared when I moved the remains. Of course they did. They were just powder after all. Whatever had formed them was erased the moment I disturbed them. I did not tell anyone what I had seen. What would I have said? I did not understand it myself. I finished my shift, went home, and spent the evening looking at the photograph on my phone, trying to convince myself that I had misinterpreted what I saw. The next morning, I arrived at work early and pulled up the file on Eleanor Vance. I read through the paperwork, looking for any mention of someone named Marty. There was nothing. Her husband, who had died 8 years earlier, was named Richard. Her children were Patricia and Michael. Her grandchildren were named Sophia and James. No Marty anywhere. I considered calling the family to ask if the name meant anything to them, but I could not figure out how to phrase the question without sounding insane. Hello, this is the man who cremated your mother. Did she know anyone named Marty? The ashes spelled out this name, and I was wondering if you could explain it. I decided to say nothing. I filed the experience away as an anomaly, an inexplicable event that probably had some rational explanation I simply could not identify. The brain sees patterns. The cremation process involves complex thermal dynamics. Maybe some combination of airflow and temperature gradients had coincidentally arranged the powder in a way that resembled letters. Unlikely, but not impossible. I told myself this, and for a while, I believed it. Then it happened again. 3 weeks after Eleanor Vance, I performed a cremation for a man named Robert Okonkwo. He was 62 years old, a retired postal worker who had died of a heart attack while mowing his lawn. His wife and 3 adult children were devastated. He had seemed healthy, had no history of heart disease, and his death was completely unexpected. The cremation proceeded normally. When I opened the retort and raked the remains toward the front, the powder had formed another pattern. This time the letters spelled S-O-R-R-Y. Sorry. I stared at the word for a long time. Unlike the first instance, this was not a name. It was a message, an apology. From whom? To whom? Robert Okonkwo had been a beloved husband and father by all accounts. What did he have to be sorry for? I photographed the chamber, just as I had before. I processed the remains according to protocol. And that evening, I drove to the public library and spent 3 hours researching cremation, looking for any scientific explanation for what I was witnessing. I found nothing. There is no documented phenomenon of cremated remains forming legible patterns. The cremation process is chaotic, involving temperatures that reduce organic matter to its most basic components. The idea that coherent messages could survive this process is, from a scientific standpoint, absurd. And yet, I had photographs. I had seen it with my own eyes, twice now. Over the following months, I began to pay closer attention to every cremation I performed. Most were completely normal. The remains were formless, random, exactly what 22 years of experience had taught me to expect. But approximately 1 in every 12 or 15 cremations produced something different. The letters appeared in the powder, arranging themselves into words that seemed to carry meaning. Some were names. David, Maria, little one, Papa. Some were messages. Forgive me. Thank you. I tried, not yet. Some were single words that I could not interpret. River, blue, 17. Locket. I documented every instance. I photographed every pattern before disturbing it. I created a spreadsheet tracking the deceased, the date, the word or words that appeared, and any information I could find about the person's life that might explain the message. In most cases, I found nothing. The names did not appear in the obituaries or the paperwork. The messages seemed to reference events or relationships I had no way of knowing about. I was seeing something that should not exist, receiving communications I could not understand, from people who were, by any medical or scientific definition, dead. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. I made an appointment with my doctor and described what I was experiencing without mentioning the specific context. I told him I had been seeing patterns that were not there, that I was concerned about my mental health. He referred me to a psychiatrist, who I saw twice. She found no evidence of psychosis, no signs of dementia, no indication that I was suffering from any condition that would cause visual hallucinations. She suggested that I might be experiencing stress-related pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli, and recommended that I consider taking some time off work. I did not take time off. I could not. I needed to understand what was happening. In July of last year, I decided to try an experiment. I had a cremation scheduled for a woman named Grace Mitchell, 84 years old, died of natural causes in her sleep. Before the cremation, I obtained permission from the family to place a small object in the casket with her. I told them it was a tradition at our facility to include a token of remembrance. They agreed and gave me a photograph of Grace with her late husband to place beside her. What I did not tell them was that I also placed a sealed envelope in the casket next to the photograph. Inside the envelope was a piece of paper with a question written on it. The question was simple. What is your message? I do not know what I expected. The envelope would be destroyed in the cremation, of course. The paper would burn, the ink would vaporize, the question would cease to exist in any physical form. But I had to try something. I had to see if there was any way to interact with whatever phenomenon I was witnessing. The cremation proceeded normally. When I opened the retort, I found the usual bone fragments and ite powder scattered across the chamber, and in the center, formed in the powder, were 3 words: Tell Sarah Garden. I had no idea what this meant. There was no Sarah in Grace Mitchell's immediate family. The obituary mentioned a sister who had died in 2015, but her name was Margaret. I searched through the paperwork, looking for any reference to a Sarah or a garden, and found nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed something in the background check we routinely perform to verify the identity of the deceased. Grace Mitchell had been born Grace Sarah Thornton. Sarah was her middle name, the name she had not used since childhood. I did not know what to do with this information. I did not know what garden the message was referring to, or who I was supposed to tell, or why any of this was happening. But I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, that the message was real. Whatever was forming these words in the ashes, it knew things that were not in the paperwork. It knew Grace Mitchell's middle name, a name that appeared only on her birth certificate, a name her own grandchildren probably did not know. I spent the next several weeks trying to find a way to investigate further. I could not contact the family directly without revealing what I had seen, and I had no idea how to explain any of this to anyone. But I could not let it go. I could not pretend I was not seeing what I was seeing. In August, I decided to contact an old friend from high school who had become a parapsychologist. His name is David Chen, and he works at a small research institute in Virginia that studies anomalous phenomena. I had not spoken to him in nearly 30 years, but I found his email address on the institute's website and sent him a message describing what I had experienced. He replied within hours, asking if he could visit the crematorium and observe a cremation firsthand. I agreed, though I was not sure what he expected to find. I warned him that the phenomenon did not occur with every cremation and that I had no way of predicting when it would happen. He said he understood and asked only that I notify him when I had a cremation scheduled so he could be present. David arrived in Baltimore in early September. He was older than I remembered, grayer, but he had the same intense curiosity in his eyes that I recalled from our adolescence. He brought with him a collection of monitoring equipment, including temperature sensors, electromagnetic field detectors, and a high-resolution camera that he set up on a tripod facing the retort door. The first cremation he observed was completely normal. No patterns, no messages, just formless powder. The second was the same. David was patient, taking readings and photographs, asking me detailed questions about the process and the equipment. On the third day, we performed a cremation for a man named William Trent, 71 years old, a retired electrician who had died of complications from Parkinson's disease. David monitored the entire process, recording temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic readings throughout. When I opened the retort, we both saw it at the same time. The powder had formed a single word: copper. David stared at the chamber for a long moment, then began taking photographs and readings with an intensity I had never seen from him. He asked me not to disturb the remains until he had finished documenting everything. The documentation took nearly 20 minutes. When he was done, he nodded, and I proceeded with the normal process, transferring the remains to the cooling tray and destroying the pattern in the process. That evening, David and I sat in my living room and reviewed his findings. The temperature readings showed nothing unusual. The electromagnetic field measurements were within normal parameters. There was no scientific evidence of anything anomalous occurring inside the retort, and yet we both had photographs of a word formed in the ashes. A word that should not have been there. A word that had no explanation. David told me about other cases he had investigated over the years. Objects moving without apparent cause, voices recorded in empty rooms, information obtained through means that defied conventional explanation. He said that in his experience, approximately 80% of reported paranormal phenomena could be explained through natural causes, misperception, or fraud. But the remaining 20% remained genuinely inexplicable. He believed what I was experiencing fell into that 20%. I asked him what he thought was happening. He said he did not know. He said that consciousness remains the greatest mystery in science, and that we have no real understanding of what it is or how it relates to the physical brain. He said that some researchers believe consciousness may be fundamental to the universe, like space and time and matter, rather than being a byproduct of brain activity. If that were true, he said, then it might be possible for aspects of consciousness to persist even after the brain ceases to function. I asked if he was saying that these messages were coming from the dead. He said he was not saying anything with certainty. He was only observing that the phenomenon I had documented was consistent with the hypothesis that some form of consciousness or information could survive physical death. He emphasized that this was speculation, not conclusion. After David left, I continued my observations. The messages kept appearing, roughly once every 12 to 15 cremations. I documented each one, photographed each pattern, and tried to research the meaning whenever possible. Some of the messages I was able to verify. A word that turned out to be the maiden name of the deceased's mother. a number that corresponded to the address where someone had lived as a child, a name that belonged to a sibling who had died decades earlier. Other messages remained mysterious, single words or phrases that I could not connect to anything in the person's documented history. I began to notice a pattern in which cremations produced messages and which did not. It was not related to the age or cause of death of the deceased. It was not related to the time of day or the temperature of the retort. But I observed that cremations following memorial services, where family and friends had gathered to remember the deceased, were more likely to produce messages than cremations performed without any ceremony. I do not know what to make of this observation. Perhaps it is coincidence. Perhaps there is some psychological factor affecting my perception. Or perhaps, as David suggested, there is something about the act of remembering that creates a connection, a channel through which information can flow. In November, I experienced something that changed my understanding of the phenomenon entirely. The deceased was a young man named Marcus Webb, 23 years old, killed in a motorcycle accident. His parents were devastated. He had been their only child, a college student studying engineering, with his whole life ahead of him. The memorial service was one of the most emotional I have ever witnessed, with friends and family weeping openly and sharing stories about Marcus's kindness and humor. I performed the cremation that evening, after everyone had gone home. When I opened the retort, I saw letters forming in the powder, as I had come to expect. But this time, the message was different. The letters spelled Tom. My name. I stood frozen in front of the open retort, staring at the 3 letters formed in the ashes of a young man I had never met. The heat from the chamber washed over my face. The smell of the cremation, which after 22 years I barely notice, suddenly seemed overwhelming. I do not know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe. My mind was racing, trying to find an explanation, trying to convince myself that I was misreading what I saw. But I was not misreading anything. The letters were clear. Tom, the name everyone has called me since childhood. I photographed the pattern with trembling hands. Then I did something I had never done before. I spoke out loud, addressing the empty chamber. "Why are you showing me my name?" I asked. The powder did not move. The letters did not change. There was no response, no sign that anything had heard me. I processed the remains according to protocol and went home. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what had happened and what it might mean. The next morning, I called David and told him about the message. He was silent for a long moment, then asked if anything significant had happened in my life recently, anything connected to the name Tom, or to someone who might want to communicate with me. I thought about it. My mother had died 3 years earlier, but she had always called me Thomas, never Tom. My father was still alive, living in a nursing home in Florida with advanced dementia. My ex-wife called me Thomas as well. I could not think of anyone close to me who had died and who might be trying to reach me. David suggested that the message might not be from someone I knew. He said that perhaps I had become a focal point for this phenomenon, a conduit through which these messages were passing. He said that my years of working with the dead might have sensitized me to something that most people never experience. I did not know if I believed this. I still do not know. In December, I received a letter that changed everything. The letter was from Patricia Vance, the daughter of Eleanor Vance, the first person whose cremation had produced a message. Nearly 9 months had passed since her mother's death, but Patricia had tracked down my name through the funeral home and written to me directly. The letter said that she had been going through her mother's belongings and had found a box of old letters in the attic. The letters were from the 1950s, written by a man named Martin to her mother when they were both teenagers. Patricia had never heard of Martin. Her mother had never mentioned him. But the letters made clear that Martin and Eleanor had been deeply in love and that something had happened to end their relationship. Patricia did some research and discovered that Martin had died in the Korean War in 1953. He was 19 years old. He and Eleanor had apparently planned to marry when he returned from overseas, but he never came home. Eleanor had kept his letters for nearly 70 years, hidden in a box in her attic, never telling anyone about the young man she had loved and lost. His name was Martin David Holloway. His nickname was Marty. I read Patricia's letter several times, my hands shaking. She had no idea why she was writing to me. She said she felt compelled to share this information with someone connected to her mother's final arrangements. She said she hoped I did not think she was strange. I wrote back to her. I told her about the message I had seen in her mother's ashes. I told her that I believed Marty had been waiting for Eleanor for nearly 70 years, and that in the moment of her cremation, he had finally been able to reach her. I do not know if Patricia believed me. I do not know if anyone would believe such a thing. But I know what I saw. I have the photograph. And I have the letter confirming that Marty was real, that he loved Eleanor, and that his name had not appeared in any of the paperwork I had access to. There was no way I could have known that name, and yet it appeared in the ashes, formed by a process that science cannot explain. I have continued working at the crematorium since then. I still document the messages when they appear. I still photograph the patterns before disturbing them. I have accumulated hundreds of images, hundreds of words, hundreds of communications from people who are, by every medical and scientific standard, dead. I do not know what to conclude from any of this. I do not know if what I am witnessing is evidence of an afterlife or some form of consciousness that persists beyond physical death, or something else entirely that I lack the framework to understand. I do not know why I am able to see these messages when, as far as I can tell, no one else in my profession has reported anything similar. I do not know if the messages are meant for me, or for the families of the deceased, or for no one in particular. I only know what I have observed. I only know what the photographs show. I only know that something is happening in the moments after cremation that defies everything I thought I understood about death and consciousness and the nature of reality. I am 54 years old. I have maybe another 10 or 15 years of working life ahead of me, assuming my health holds out. I will probably spend those years continuing to perform cremations, continuing to document the messages, continuing to search for an explanation that may never come. Some of my colleagues have noticed that I spend more time than necessary examining the retort after each cremation. Some have asked why I take photographs of the chamber before processing the remains. I tell them I am documenting the process for quality control purposes. They accept this explanation without question. I have thought many times about going public with what I have witnessed. I have imagined writing an article for a scientific journal, or contacting a news organization, or posting the photographs online for the world to see. But I have not done any of these things, partly because I fear professional ridicule, partly because I fear being dismissed as a fraud or a lunatic, but mostly because I am not sure the world is ready for what I have discovered. If what I am seeing is real, if consciousness truly does survive physical death in some form, then everything we think we know about the nature of existence is wrong. Every religion, every philosophy, every scientific theory about the relationship between mind and matter would need to be reconsidered. I am not qualified to lead that reconsideration. I am a crematory operator, not a scientist or a philosopher or a theologian. I do not have the knowledge or the credentials to interpret what I have witnessed. I can only observe, document, and wonder. The ashes spelled a name I never told anyone. Then they spelled another name, and messages that should have been impossible. Information that could not have survived the cremation process. Communications from people who were by every definition dead. I do not know what this means. I only know that it happened. I only know that it continues to happen. And I only know that when my time comes, when I am the one lying in the cardboard casket waiting for the retort to ignite, I wonder what message I will leave behind. I wonder if anyone will be there to see it. I wonder if anyone will understand. My name is Thomas Brennan. I have worked at the Riverside Memorial Crematorium for 22 years. I have performed approximately 9,000 cremations, and I have learned that death is not the end of communication. It is only the beginning of a conversation we do not yet know how to have. The ashes speak. I have heard them, and I will keep listening until I understand what they are trying to say, or until I become ashes myself, whichever comes first.